Hello and welcome to another WrestleDiary. I wanted to do something a little bit different for this video. WrestleMania weekend is upon us and I'm going to do a predictions video for WrestleMania 34, but I thought it would be fun to count down my top 10 WrestleMania matches. I don't think I've ever done this before, maybe back in the early days of my channel when it was more wrestling oriented, but apart from that I can't recall a time that I did anything like that. Me and Connie did the 30 Days of Mania series where we watched all 29 WrestleManias up until that point and basically commented on all of the main matches, but I know it on a list, so this is again my favourites, so not what I would call the best WrestleMania matches, but my personal favourites for different reasons that I'll get into. I was thinking of doing a top 5, but I wanted to kind of include some more out of the box, maybe, potentially, probably not, picks for, you know, it's number 6, number 10. So let's just get right into it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you have a top 5, top 10 WrestleMania matches that are your favourites and why, I'd love to hear them. My number 10 is Mick Foley versus Edge from WrestleMania 22, their hardcore match. You know, it's probably only like 12-13 minutes or something, but it was finally a chance for Mick Foley to have that classic WrestleMania match. And it was his wheelhouse, it was his kind of, you know, hardcore environment. It's a match that probably couldn't have happened even a year later. You know, they really started to clamp down on stuff like that, especially by, I guess, the next year. So it happened right when it needed to. It was getting very close to being cut off, where you couldn't do a hardcore match like that, where both guys are bleeding and there's all this hardcore stuff happening, and that ridiculous spot at the end with Edge spearing Foley through the flaming table. It was a great match for Edge to kind of push him to that next level, I feel, because I certainly think at that time Edge was becoming the guy. Or at least one of the guys next to John Cena, so I think it was a hugely important match for Edge. But for Mick Foley, it was finally his time to kind of have that WrestleMania classic, and he's one of my favourite wrestlers, so I had to include it for that reason. I do really love the match. Number 9, Shawn Michaels versus Kurt Angle at WrestleMania 21. Just a clinic, you know, and I love when you put two wrestlers together who are very different. You know, Kurt Angle, very kind of traditional, just a proper wrestler. Not that Shawn Michaels isn't, but you know, Shawn Michaels has always been more flamboyant, more of an entertainer, and Kurt Angle became incredibly entertaining, but at his heart, at his core, he was a wrestler. And so Shawn Michaels had to kind of go to a different level and really grapple and show that he could wrestle, and he wasn't just this flashy guy with a few moves and a super kick. And not that people were kind of accusing him of that, but it pushed Shawn Michaels, I think, in an interesting way that created this really memorable match. They had a couple of really good matches after this too, but this one was, I think, like the end of the match, he had Shawn Michaels in the ankle lock for like 2 minutes. It was ridiculous, and the way they milked that, it was just a classic. Love it. Number 8, The Rock versus Hulk Hogan from WrestleMania 18. Just one of the most entertaining matches in the history of wrestling. It's so much fun, you know, watching that, you know, the night afterwards when I was a kid. It was just unbelievable. You know, the build up, the crowd going mental for Hogan and not knowing how it was going to be. I mean, as a match, you know, it's very simple, but the psychology and the working off that crowd, feeding off that crowd, the electricity, as The Rock used to say, that's really what it was. It's one of the most magical moments in wrestling history, and two of these icons facing, and it's just so much fun to watch. Number 7, the Hardy Boys versus the Dudley Boys versus Edge and Christian at WrestleMania 17, TLC. I almost in a way prefer their WrestleMania 2000 match, because that's the one I kind of first saw and kind of obsessed over, and had that on VHS and watched it over and over again. One of my favourite matches, the Triangle Ladder match from WrestleMania 2000, but the TLC match, they took it to a whole other level. It's just an unbelievable spectacle that I don't think it was ever quite topped. Should never really, you know, try to be topped, and never will be anyway, because you look at that spear from Edge on Jeff. That's one of the most spectacular moments in WWE history. It gets replayed over and over again, and for a reason. I remember showing my cousin Ben that on holiday in Greece, and he was just like, "Oh, it's so cringy." I was like, "Oh, watch this moment." He gets speared from like 15 feet up, and he's just like, "Oh, it's so hokey. Oh, it's cringy," you know. So I always think of that when I think of that match now, unfortunately, but. It's an incredible match. The athleticism, the balls of you know, Jeff Hardy and all of those guys taking the bumps they did. Just as far as a match like that, that's the pinnacle, and it's just pure entertainment and ridiculous, awesome. Number 6, Bret Hart versus Owen Hart from WrestleMania 10. Obviously, it's much better than his match with Yokozuna at the end of the night, but I loved Bret bookending the beginning and closing of the show with two matches, and how him and his brother just put on a classic. It was just a great wrestling match, and I love Bret Hart so much, and I love Owen Hart so much. They had great chemistry together, and for them to open a WrestleMania and have this 20, 30 minute kind of just wrestling clinic, it was just so good. It's so incredible, and I love the fact that Owen won. There's just something so, and in the way that he won, and that that Bret would still go on to win the title later on that night, but it was so cool for Owen to get that moment as well. And I just love those two together so much, and so that it has to be on the list, and it was very close to making the top 5. Into the top 5 now, my number 5 would be The Rock versus Stone Cold Steve Austin at WrestleMania 19. Yeah. It's the third of their trilogy at WrestleMania, and my favorite. So yes, the 17 match is not on my list, as great as that is, and it is a great match, probably even one of the best. This one I prefer. I love The Rock's Hollywood rock kind of dickhead, kind of I'm the man, I'm the movie star, I'm bigger than all of you now persona. That was so good. He was so good at playing that role, and to see him and The Rock go on that journey together across those 3 WrestleManias and across those years of being rivals, and you're never going to get that again. The chemistry between The Rock and Stone Cold, and for two of those personalities to be as popular as they were, and to be in the wrestling business at the same time, in the same company, and on the opposite side of the ring with each other, it was just something you'll probably never see again to that degree. And this was the end of it. This was the final one, and there's a poetry to it, and how Austin always beat The Rock, and The Rock finally beat Austin, and that was it. That was Stone Cold's last match, and it was one of those things where he never came back, nor did he ever announce it was the end. It was one of those kind of perfectly fitting to that character send-offs where he rode off into the sunset earlier than he would have liked, but it was a great way to end it. And I just love that spot at the end where he's hit him with 2 rock bottoms, he holds him up for the third, and he's just holding him there. Austin's done, he's out on his feet. And then he picks him up and he slams him down. And the way that Austin sold that was like he'd been shot in the back. It was just an incredible match. I thought it really underrated of their 3, I think. But easily my favourite. Number 4, we have Bret Hart versus Stone Cold Steve Austin, WrestleMania 13, which I just recently rewatched because there was an incredible Edge and Christian Anatomy of a Match podcast where they had both guys on talking about it. And it was just one of the best things I've ever listened to. So I rewatched the match, and it's just... my type of match is just a proper brawl, but a great story and great selling. Not even that many moves, but everything counts. Everything feels like it hurts. There's an art form to doing that, and they pulled it off to, ridiculous levels in this match. And it has one of the most iconic images in wrestling history, I think, that the Austin with the bloods, coming down his face. And I could talk about that match for half an hour if I wanted to, so I'll just leave it there. But it's just, that's one of the best, if maybe not the best, WrestleMania match, and had to be in my top 5. Number 3 is a little bit of a cheat. It's 2 matches. I couldn't really decide between the 2, but they both very much inform each other. And it is Daniel Bryan versus Triple H at WrestleMania 30, and Daniel Bryan versus Randy Orton and Batista at WrestleMania 30. Now, I wouldn't put these 2 matches not even in a top 5 best WrestleMania matches, but for me personally, being there live, it was an amazing experience. I think the Triple H match is the one I prefer. I think that's a great, great match. I was just so excited to see those 2 have a match together, because I think Triple H is, some things about Triple H I don't like, but he's an incredibly great, worker. And I love seeing him mix it up with different younger talent at times, and so it was great to see him and Daniel Bryan have a match. But the importance of it and the weight of it, and then that main event, which is just the culmination of one of the greatest underdog stories ever told in any form of any media ever, in my opinion. It was so organic and so real and raw, and I don't know if that'll ever happen again. It could. It's one of those things where I think that could happen again, but it certainly hadn't happened before, where the fans had really literally dictated and made plans change. And for me to be a part of that as well, by buying the t-shirt, by going to WrestleMania, by chanting yes, all that stuff, it's something you're never going to forget if you were there. And even if you're at home watching, and if you're a fan of him, and he was my favourite wrestler at the time, I guess now that he's back, he's my favourite wrestler now. That's a cool thing, and that's kind of an exciting full circle moment. But those two matches, that night, that moment is unbelievable. In a way, I'd put it in number one, but I have to go with my guns and put two more matches above that in terms of my personal favorite preference. So, my number two is Shawn Michaels versus Chris Jericho at WrestleMania 19. For the longest time, this was my favorite match of all time, and certainly my favorite WrestleMania match. It was something I never thought we'd see. I was a huge Chris Jericho fan in 2000 when I first became a full-time, watching every week, keeping up with everything, fan. Chris Jericho was one of my favorites. Loved him and followed him through all the twists and turns and everything, and turning heel and turning against The Rock and winning the world title and the WWE title, and then losing it to Triple H and all those things in between. And then for Shawn Michaels to come back, I thought, oh, could you imagine if he, because at that time when Shawn Michaels came back in 2002, it was like just for one match against Triple H. I remember reading online, he was like, yeah, I feel pretty good, after that match at Triple H. I thought, oh, if he could just come back and do a match with RVD and Chris Jericho, it'd be amazing. Little did I know he'd go on and wrestle for a solid 8 years after that, but when it became clear they were going to have a WrestleMania match, I was so excited for it. And just the build-up, go back and watch that build-up package. It's so incredible, just how Jericho modeled himself after Shawn Michaels to an extent, and the similarities between the two, and this kind of just almost a student-teacher dynamic without really them having had that relationship. There was this real great story to it, and I loved that even though it was kind of a heated rivalry, it wasn't a brawl. It was them trying to out-wrestle each other. They were doing their absolute best, and Shawn Michaels was turning back the clock. And again, this is before we really knew that he could go as well as he could as far as a wrestling match. He had the brawl with Triple H at SummerSlam. He had the Elimination Chamber match. He'd done some matches, but there were all these gimmicks around it. Even when he lost the world title to Triple H, it was like this big steel cage match with ladders and chairs. This was just true wrestling match. No gimmicks, no cheating, just these two guys, literally at the top of their game, trying to see who was the best. I love the way it ends. I love every little part about it. It's one of my favorite matches, but it isn't as good as my number one pick. I don't know why I'm looking at my phone because I already know what it is. Shawn Michaels versus, drum roll please. We don't have a drum. Okay. The Undertaker at WrestleMania 25. You could lump in 26 with it, but we're going to stick with WrestleMania 25. When they had the match at WrestleMania 26, I said, oh, this is a better one than the first one. This is definitely better than last year. I think I was fooling myself with that one. Taker, Michaels, WrestleMania 25, it's one of the best matches ever. And it's to do with, the fact that Taker nearly killed himself, and the drama that was heightened because of that, but also these two legends, these two guys who'd put in 20 plus years into the wrestling business and were at the twilight of their careers, or at least Shawn Michaels was. And I think they were both at their absolute best in this match, and that's such a magical moment. I mean, you look at Shawn Michaels taking a chokeslam in this match. Like, he goes up to the ceiling and back, He commits to everything. He gives it his all. The Undertaker comes off the top rope with an elbow drop and just full-on flatbacks it in the middle of the ring. He went all out for this match. And it shows, the psychology, the history between these two, all the matches they had before, the darkness and the light, darkness rises and light to meet it, to quote Supreme Leader Snoke. And I had to get a Star Wars reference in there, didn't I? It's incredible. And the way they had that crowd in the palm of their hands. And I thought that when Shawn Michaels kicked out of the tombstone, that was the first time it had been done since, like, the 90s, when 10 years earlier, when it was Undertaker and Kane, which felt more appropriate because Kane was this monster who could feasibly kick out of a tombstone. But, it felt like such a huge moment when he kicked out of that tombstone. But I've recently rewatched Undertaker and Edge at WrestleMania 24, and Edge kicks out of the tombstone, but he does it after like a 20-30 second wait from the referee to run back into the ring, so it's not quite the same where, Shawn Michaels skinned the cat, Taker caught him tombstone. It just felt like such a perfect kind of reversal into his finisher. That is it, absolutely. He pins him straight away, and Michaels kicks out. I remember watching this live with my mates, losing my absolute mind. And there's that shot of Taker, his face kind of lying on Shawn Michaels' hip, just he can't believe what's just happened. And everyone started laughing, but to me that wasn't funny. That was like, that drew me in so much, because Taker rarely shows any kind of emotion like that, and to show that kind of despair, like, what more can I possibly do to this guy to beat him? Like, I've never faced anything like this, resolve like this from someone like this, like Shawn Michaels. And then they continue, and it was so special to me because when Shawn went up onto the turnbuckle to do the moonsault, I literally stood up from my chair and I went, oh my god, I know what they're going for. Moonsault into the tombstone. Please work. Please work. Please work. He does the moonsault. He lands perfectly in position. Taker drops him. I went, oh my god, that's the best thing I've ever seen. It just, I can't explain how elated I felt watching that match live. And every time since, it is such a fantastic match. It's one of the best, I think. And if I was to do a top 5 best WrestleMania matches ever, I think that would probably be #1 for me. It's just great. And again, just riding the high of that kind of initial experience watching it live, and being a fan of elbow drops and seeing Undertaker do a massive one just made me jump up to my feet. That's kind of my gauge for like a real all-timer wrestling match. If I jump to my feet, like literally, that's usually a good sign, I think. I think it's a good sign for anything, for anyone, but you know, that's certainly what I think is that moment, or the multiple moments in that match where I jumped up to my feet and couldn't believe what I was seeing. And that's what being a wrestling fan is all about. So there we go. Thank you for watching. Leave your thoughts down below if you have any. And if you have any particular WrestleMania favorites of your own, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.
He's alright by me. Apart from the fact he throws cans of Carlin into a tree. Yeah, he's really cool. Yeah, he's really cool. But he's not quite as cool as you, 'cause